and shows you how the icon systems fit in for a quick overview. Further in the book, it's broken out by those sections with more detail that includes the practice and the description. So our most recent meeting of the Best Practices Committee took place in San Francisco on August 5th. And the committee met, and we're going to go through all of the transaction records that were discussed, those that were passed and those that did not pass. So let's take a look at our first best practice that was recommended at the San Francisco meeting. That would be TR 2802, Service Connections. The interesting thing about this particular transaction record is it has a very long history. Originally, this was brought forward as a possible best practice that dealt with locating all laterals. This met with a lot of resistance, and ultimately it was reshaped to specifically deal with sewer laterals as a result of some of the gas explosions as a result of those being bored through the sewer laterals, that is. And then ultimately that got shot down mainly because consensus could not be reached on limiting it to a single type of lateral when truthfully all laterals should be marked. At that point the TR died on the vine, as it were, but one of the good things about this process is the ability for the teams to revive under a new number. And that's exactly what happened with this 2802. A new task team was formed in addressing all the service connections. And in January, we brought forth language to the committee, which did not meet approval by all the stakeholders. So we had to go back into session behind the scenes in order to produce language for our meeting in San Francisco. As a group, we all felt within the task team that we had done a pretty good job accomplishing what we wanted to with this language, and that was to clearly indicate that the responsibility for locating laterals existed for all entities up to the point that they no longer had responsibility for it, typically at a house or the first structure that it came to. We felt that that was pretty well covered in the language and well understood. When we arrived at after the 30-day review point in San Francisco, we discovered that there were some folks that still needed to have some additional tweaking done to the language. So this has been a very long process, but we really are getting to the end of it. In fact, currently we have a meeting set for next week to discuss this language that you see before you here. And essentially this language says in the statement, a service line is marked in response to a locate request to the operator that uses the service line to pursue a business that derives revenue by providing a product or service to an end-use customer via the service line, or the service line is marked in response to a locate request to a governmental entity that provides a product or service to an end-use customer via the service line. The description goes on to further describe what a service line is, and that this is a type of underground facility connected to a main, that it's used by an operator to provide a product or service within a right-of-way easement or allowed access to or through private property in the course of pursuing a business that generates revenue, and that the operator locates and marks these services within the bounds of the locate request up to the point of their operational responsibility, to the point the service line enters a building, or to where the access to locate the line terminate. The discussion that surrounded this new language had to do with the fact that the designation of the scope of a particular locate is defined by the ticket itself. So the locate ticket gives you the idea of the boundaries of where it should start and finish. However, indicating that it needs to start from the main was important. It was more the end of it. If the work is taking place, for instance, in a front yard because there's a plant being put in the ground, and they designate that with an electronic white line or some other type polygon, there's no need to mark it all the way to the actual house. You're really marking within the bounds of the particular locate request. So this is the language that we're going to be discussing, and hopefully we'll all be in agreement with this within the task team next week. One of the TRs that just took a life of its own on was TR 2601, and it was titled Colored Duct Tape, although the more appropriate would have been Colored Adhesives. But as you can see, this thing's been around for over 3 years, and it's centered around the idea that in historical areas or where there was a particular pavement that folks felt marks were being construed as graffiti, that this was perhaps an opportunity to utilize another means to mark, meaning some kind of special adhesive. And it was discovered that there are adhesives out there, and this is in use, it is in practice. However, NULCA felt strongly that this particular means of marking was not a best practice, and therefore it should not be given consideration. There was further discussion about whether or not we just needed to change the name of it and call it low impact marking, but ultimately it was determined in the best interest of the amount of time that's been invested in this and the fact that the stakeholders were pretty adamant about not allowing this to go through, that we should go ahead and close this TR. Should somebody want to bring it back up, they can under a new name, and we'll just wait and see if that happens. The next group of TRs that came up under discussion were as a result of the formation of a glossary review team, and it was the idea that we needed to go through and look at the glossary for terms that were either not in the glossary, that needed to be, and that they were sort of hinge points on particular best practices and maybe needed clarification, and also that there were possibly updated terms that needed to be included in there. And so this is why the team was formed and came together. So the first one we come to is TR 2009-01, Project Owner. The definition that was arrived at by the task team is the person financially responsible for the undertaking of a project that involves excavation or demolition. And this term was agreed to by the committee, and therefore did pass during the session. The next one was a little more difficult. It was 2009-02, and it was looking at the term positive response as it's laid out already in the book. And the idea was to try to make sure that we clarified that what positive response is in terms of an electronic means to communicate back to a call center. And so during the discussion, there were some who were afraid that they would need to, since this doesn't indicate paint marks on the ground as a method of positive response, that we really needed to indicate with a new definition what we were talking about in terms of electronic positive response back to the center. So we're holding back on this discussion. There's some additional information that will come up later where you'll see where this idea of using this definition may be further clarified by another TR that we'll be discussing in a moment. TR 2009-03 was another one that was posted for 30-day review, and it met with some discussion primarily of whether or not we are able to say owner or owner-operator. The committee discussed changing this, but as a result of that, because it is a substantial change, it needed to go back to the team to review and post for consideration. So the definition as it was provided there was an owner of buried facilities that has registered the buried facilities with a one-call organization. The change would be an owner-operator of buried facilities that has registered the buried facilities with a one-call organization. TR 2009-04 is pretty straightforward. It was the definition of the word public. It seems pretty straightforward, and why someone would even need to clarify that in the glossary probably needs some explanation. There are TRs, actually there are best practices within the book right now that make reference to the public, and there were some that felt this perhaps could be limited to the public as it relates to damage prevention, but it was generally understood that this term of the public was the general population or community at large. TR 2009-05 deals with the definition of a railroad operating corridor. This was approved by the committee, and the definition is the property which is essential to a railroad company to enable it to discharge its function and duties as a common carrier by rail. It includes the roadbed, right-of-way, tracks, bridges, stations, and such like property. TR 2009-07 was large or complex projects. This was also approved, and this was language that actually came out of an existing best practice that dealt with the management of large projects. And the definition, as was passed by the committee, was a large complex project is a single project or a series of repetitive, small, short-term projects that are related in scope, which impact facilities over a long period of time or a large area. 2009-08 dealt with digital imagery, and look for the definition of that. And this was important because we've looked at the inclusion of digital imagery into one-call centers as a best practice. So it was important to define the term. And the term as we've defined it is a computer